The autumn wind whispered through the Morgan estate as Arturo, a 68-year-old former hospital CEO, collapsed among his beloved roses. His weathered hands clutched his chest, vision blurring as memories of Elizabeth, his late wife, flashed before his eyes. In that critical moment, a young homeless nurse named Daniela rushed to his aid, her skilled hands performing CPR with desperate determination. As she fought to save him, a silver locket with a crescent moon symbol slipped from her neck, catching Arturo's fading gaze. Through the haze of pain, he recognized it identical to the one he'd given his wife 30 years ago. The next words she spoke would shatter his world forever. "I don't want money. Let me be your daughter for 1 week." Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Arturo Morgan stood at his study window, watching autumn leaves dance across the immaculately maintained garden that stretched behind his Boston mansion. At 68, his tall frame remained imposing, though slightly stooped with age and grief. His silver hair and well-tailored suits couldn't mask the profound loneliness in his steel blue eyes. 10 years had passed since the accident that took his only son, Michael. The memory still haunted him: a rainy night, a drunk driver, and a phone call that shattered his world. Michael's death drove a wedge between Arturo and his daughter-in-law, Sarah, who eventually moved to California with his granddaughter, Amy, unable to bear the weight of shared grief. The garden became his sanctuary, a living memorial to Elizabeth, his beloved wife who succumbed to cancer 3 years before Michael's death. Every morning he meticulously tended the roses she'd planted, trimmed the hedges they'd shaped together, and maintained the stone pathways they'd walked countless times. The garden was his last connection to happiness, though lately even this refuge brought more pain than peace. Few knew of the depression that consumed him behind closed doors. The successful businessman who built Boston's largest private hospital network now spent sleepless nights in his vast, empty home. His wealth, once a source of pride, felt meaningless without family to share it. The medications for his heart condition piled up in his cabinet, often neglected as he questioned whether fighting to live alone was worth the effort. Across town, in a run-down apartment complex, 23-year-old Daniela Thomas prepared for another exhausting day. Her small studio apartment barely fit 2 beds, one for her, another for her mother fighting stage 4 breast cancer. Despite their circumstances, the space was immaculate, filled with makeshift medical supplies and the gentle scent of lavender her mother loved. Daniela's days began before dawn, administering her mother's medications before rushing to her volunteer shift at the Sunset Grove Elderly Care Center. Her nursing degree remained unfinished, abandoned when her mother's illness demanded full-time care, but her natural gift for healing never dimmed. The elderly residents at Sunset Grove adored her. Something in her gentle touch and patient smile brought comfort to even the most difficult patients. She could calm agitated dementia patients with soft songs, coax resistant residents to take their medications, and bring light to the loneliest eyes. "You have healing hands," her mother often said, watching Daniela organize their meager medications with professional precision. But behind Daniela's compassionate smile lay a mystery even she couldn't fully grasp. Her earliest memories were fragmented: a woman's soft voice singing lullabies, the scent of roses, and a silver locket she wore always but couldn't remember receiving. The other nurses whispered about her background, wondering how someone who lived in the city's poorest district could carry herself with such natural grace. Her knowledge of classical music, literature, and proper etiquette seemed at odds with her circumstances. Even her accent occasionally slipped, revealing hints of a more privileged upbringing than her current situation suggested. "Your mother must have been someone special," her colleagues would say, watching her interact with wealthy patients with natural ease. But Maria, the woman Daniela called mother, was a former hotel housekeeper who'd raised her alone in poverty. The contradiction nagged at Daniela's consciousness, though loyalty and love prevented her from questioning too deeply. Throughout the years, Daniela had fought to maintain her dignity despite their poverty. She'd learned to survive on the streets when they couldn't make rent, yet never lost her compassion. Even now, she shared their meager food with elderly neighbors and offered free care to those who couldn't afford medical help. Each night, after her mother fell asleep, Daniela would sit by their tiny window, fingering the silver locket she never removed. Inside was a faded photograph of a rose garden she didn't recognize, yet it filled her with inexplicable longing. Sometimes in her dreams she walked those gardens with a tall, elegant woman whose face she could never quite see. Back at the Morgan estate, Lorena Brooks moved efficiently through her morning routine, her 60 years wearing lightly on her stern features. For 3 decades, she'd managed the household with iron efficiency, earning Arturo's complete trust. Every surface gleamed, every meal appeared perfectly timed, and every detail of the household ran with clockwork precision. But beneath her efficient exterior, Lorena carried dark secrets. Her immaculate records concealed years of careful financial manipulation. Small sums diverted, accounts carefully adjusted, all hidden beneath the mountain of paperwork that Arturo had long since entrusted to her care. The trust fund Elizabeth had established before her death, the one meant for the daughter she'd been forced to give up, had slowly been drained away under Lorena's careful management. Each morning, as she arranged fresh flowers in Elizabeth's favorite vases, Lorena fought down the guilt of her betrayal. She'd been more than a housekeeper to Elizabeth, she'd been a confidante, the only one who knew about the baby born in secret, the child given up to protect the family's reputation. Elizabeth had trusted her to watch over the child from afar, to ensure her safety and comfort. Instead, Lorena had constructed an elaborate web of lies, embezzling the money meant for the girl's care while feeding Elizabeth false information about her daughter's supposed life with a wealthy family. The weight of these deceptions had grown heavier since Elizabeth's death. Watching Arturo's decline, seeing him withdraw further into grief and loneliness, tested her resolve. Yet the fear of discovery, of losing everything she'd built, drove her to maintain the facade. For her position in the household, her financial security, her very freedom all depended on keeping the past buried. As another autumn morning dawned over Boston, these 3 souls moved through their separate lives, unaware of how fate was about to intertwine their destinies. In his garden, Arturo dead-headed roses with trembling hands, fighting another wave of dizziness. In her tiny apartment, Daniela prepared for another day of service, the mysterious locket cool against her skin. And in the mansion's kitchen, Lorena began her daily routine, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to shatter. The stage was set for a story of lost identity, buried truths, and the redemptive power of love, a tale that would challenge the boundaries of family and force each character to confront the consequences of choices made long ago. Lorena Brooks moved through the Morgan mansion like a shadow, her footsteps silent despite the gleaming hardwood floors. At 60, her steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun, she embodied the perfect image of a long-serving housekeeper to Boston's elite. But beneath that polished exterior lay a web of secrets that had entangled 3 generations of the Morgan family. 30 years ago, she'd arrived at the mansion's door with impeccable references all forged. Her real history, buried under layers of careful fabrication, included a string of thefts from wealthy employers across Europe. But Elizabeth Morgan, young and naive in her newfound wealth, had seen only Lorena's efficiency and apparent devotion. That first year had cemented Lorena's position as she became Elizabeth's closest confidante. When Elizabeth discovered her pregnancy, a child conceived before her marriage to Arturo, it was Lorena who orchestrated the cover-up. She arranged the private birth, selected the adoption agency, and managed the secret trust fund Elizabeth established for her daughter's future. "Promise me you'll watch over her," Elizabeth had pleaded, tears streaming down her face as she signed the adoption papers. "Make sure she's safe, loved, well cared for," Lorena had promised, even as she began siphoning money from the trust into offshore accounts. Over the years, Lorena masterfully played both sides. To Elizabeth, she brought carefully crafted stories of her daughter's happy life with a wealthy family. In reality, she'd lost track of the child after arranging her placement in a state-run orphanage, using the trust fund money to build her own secret fortune. Her position in the household grew stronger with each passing year. She managed the staff, controlled the finances, and slowly became indispensable to both Elizabeth and Arturo. When Elizabeth fell ill, Lorena was the perfect caretaker, tending to her former mistress with seeming devotion while systematically destroying any documentation that might lead back to the secret child. Elizabeth's death should have been the end of it. The trust fund was nearly drained, the adoption records buried, and Lorena's position secure. But Elizabeth's final letter to Arturo, sealed with instructions to open it upon her death, remained hidden in Lorena's private safe. The letter contained not only the truth about the child but details of the trust fund that would expose Lorena's years of theft. Now, as she surveyed her domain from the mansion's upper windows, Lorena's mind constantly worked to protect her position. She'd cultivated relationships with all of Boston's elite families, positioning herself as the keeper of their secrets. Many of them had skeletons in their closet's affairs, financial misdeeds, family scandals, and Lorena kept careful records of everything she observed. Her own suite of rooms in the mansion's east wing reflected her accumulated power. Designer clothes filled the closets, expensive art adorned the walls, and a hidden wall safe contained documents that could destroy half of Boston's prestigious families. She'd come too far, sacrificed too much, to risk losing it all now. Every morning, as she reviewed the household accounts, Lorena added to her insurance policy photographs, documents, and records that would protect her position. She knew too many secrets, held too much power, for anyone to risk exposing her. The mansion's staff feared her, the family's social circle respected her, and Arturo trusted her completely. But lately, watching Arturo's declining health, a new fear had taken root. His will named her as a beneficiary, ensuring her comfortable retirement. But if anything happened to him before Elizabeth's letter was destroyed, if the truth about the missing trust fund came to light, everything she'd built would crumble. So she watched and waited, maintaining her perfect facade while guarding against any threat to her position. The mansion had become her fortress, its secrets her weapons, and she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect what she'd built. Those who looked closely might have seen the calculation behind her efficient manner, the steel beneath her servile smile. But no one looked closely at servants, and that had always been Lorena's greatest advantage. She was the perfect housekeeper, the trusted confidante, the keeper of secrets, and she intended to keep it that way, no matter the cost. As she completed her morning inspection of the mansion, straightening an antique vase here, adjusting a priceless painting there, Lorena allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. This was her true masterpiece, not just the perfect maintenance of a wealthy household, but the careful manipulation of lives and fortunes that had made her, in her own way, more powerful than the family she served. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows, and Lorena paused to check her reflection in a gilt-edged mirror. The perfect housekeeper looked back at her, grey hair immaculate, black dress pristine. Only her eyes betrayed the ruthless ambition that had carried her from poverty to power, and the determination to keep everything she'd gained, no matter who had to be sacrificed along the way. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Daniela hurried through Boston's affluent Beacon Hill neighborhood, her worn nursing shoes silent on the cobblestone sidewalks. Her early shift at the elderly care center had ended, but her mother's medications needed to be administered within the hour. Time was always her enemy these days. A commotion ahead caught her attention. Through the ornate iron gates of a magnificent mansion, she saw an elderly man collapse among the roses. Without hesitation, Daniela vaulted over the low section of the fence, her medical training taking over as she ran to his side. "Sir, can you hear me?" She knelt beside him, quickly assessing his condition. His pulse was weak and irregular, his breathing labored. Classic signs of a heart attack. The man's eyes fluttered, focusing briefly on her face before clouding with pain. Daniela began chest compressions immediately, her movements precise despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Someone call 911," she shouted toward the mansion. But between compressions, she noticed a leather portfolio had fallen from the man's grasp, its contents spilling across the garden path. For 15 grueling minutes, Daniela fought to keep him alive. Her arms ached, sweat dampened her hairline, but she refused to give up. Finally, she felt a stronger pulse beneath her hands, heard his breathing even out. The man's eyes opened fully, revealing a deep blue gaze clouded with confusion. "Elizabeth," he whispered, reaching weakly toward her face. As Daniela leaned closer to hear him better, her silver locket slipped from beneath her uniform, catching the morning light. The man's eyes widened, focusing on the crescent moon design. "That locket. Where did you?" His words were cut short by the arrival of paramedics who quickly took over Daniela's life-saving efforts. As they prepared to transport him, Daniela quickly gathered the scattered papers, stuffing them back into the portfolio. One document caught her eye, a hospital deed with the name Arturo Morgan prominently displayed. She recognized it immediately. Morgan General was one of Boston's most prestigious private hospitals. "Wait," Arturo called weakly from the stretcher. "The papers, my documents." "I'll keep them safe," Daniela promised, clutching the portfolio. "I can bring them to the hospital later." That evening, after ensuring her mother was comfortable, Daniela made her way to Morgan General. The private suite on the top floor spoke of wealth and influence. Arturo Morgan sat propped against pillows, looking stronger but still pale. "My guardian angel returns," he said, attempting a smile. "The doctors tell me I owe you my life." Daniela placed the portfolio carefully on his bedside table. "I'm just glad I was there to help. I'm a nurse, well, almost. I work at Sunset Grove Care Center." A nurse, Arturo studied her worn clothing with new understanding. "Yet you look familiar somehow. That locket you wear." Daniela's hand went instinctively to the silver pendant. "I've had it as long as I can remember. The only thing I have from before." Before. She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. Something about this man inspired trust. "I grew up in foster care. This locket and a few scattered memories are all I have of my early years." Arturo's expression softened with compassion. "Life has not been easy for you, has it? Yet you still stop to help others." He gestured to the portfolio. "Those documents you saved, they're worth millions. The deed to my hospital, investment papers, everything I built over a lifetime. Many would have seen an opportunity there." "I don't want your money, Mr. Morgan." The words came out more sharply than she intended. "What do you want then?" Daniela surprised herself with her answer. "Let me be your daughter for 1 week." The words hung in the air between them. Arturo's expression shifted from shock to confusion to something unreadable. Daniela rushed to explain, "I've never known what it's like to have a father, to have a real family. Just 1 week to experience what that feels like. That's all I ask in return for the documents." "You're proposing a transaction then? 1 week off. Pretend family in exchange for my life's work." "Not pretend," Daniela said softly. "Just real for a little while. I don't want inheritance or money or position. I just want to know what it feels like to have a father care about me, even if it's only for 7 days." Arturo was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Perhaps he saw something there, loneliness that matched his own, sincerity that couldn't be faked, or maybe just a shadow of someone long lost. 1 week, he finally said, "starting tomorrow. I'll have my housekeeper prepare a room." "Thank you," Daniela whispered, tears threatening. "I promise you won't regret this." "We shall see." Arturo's tone was unreadable, Though I warn you, my household may not be as welcoming as you hope. My housekeeper, Lorena, is protective. I understand. I don't expect anything grand, just moments, conversations, maybe helping in your garden. I saw how beautiful it is. Something flickered in Arturo's eyes at the mention of the garden. Yes, well, we'll sort out the details tomorrow. For now, I need rest. Daniela nodded and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Mr. Morgan, thank you for giving me this chance. After she left, Arturo lay back against his pillows, mind churning. The girl's request was bizarre, yet something about her tugged at his memory. That locket so similar to the one he'd given Elizabeth years ago. And when she smiled, there was something in her expression. He shook his head, dismissing the fanciful thoughts. 1 week? What harm could it do? He was lonely, she was clearly in need of kindness, and perhaps they could both find some small comfort in the arrangement. Yet as he drifted off to sleep, his dreams were troubled by half-remembered conversations with Elizabeth, whispered secrets, and the image of a silver locket catching the light of a long-ago autumn morning. In her tiny apartment, Daniela sat beside her sleeping mother, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The impulse to ask for that week had come from somewhere deep inside, a longing she couldn't explain. For 7 days she would have a glimpse of the life she'd always dreamed of a father, a real home, a chance to belong somewhere. She touched the locket gently and as always felt that strange sense of connection to something just beyond her memory. Tomorrow would begin her week as Arturo Morgan's daughter. 7 days to create memories that would have to last a lifetime. Neither of them could know that their simple arrangement would unravel decades of carefully guarded secrets, threaten powerful interests, and change both their lives forever. The autumn wind rustled through the garden, where they'd first met, carrying with it the scent of roses and the whispers of long-buried truths waiting to be discovered. As dawn broke over the Morgan estate, Lorena watched from an upstairs window as Daniela walked through the front gates. The girl's simple dress and worn shoes marked her as an outsider, yet she carried herself with an unsettling grace that made Lorena's eyes narrow with suspicion. "You can't be serious about this arrangement, Mr. Morgan," Lorena had argued the previous evening. "Letting a complete stranger into our home? After she practically blackmailed you with those documents." But Arturo had been unmoved. "It's done, Lorena. 1 week. Prepare the blue guest room." Now, as Lorena opened the front door, her greeting was arctic. "Miss Thomas, is it? Mr. Morgan is having breakfast in the conservatory. Follow me and try not to touch anything." The conservatory was Lorena's pride, every surface gleaming, rare orchids blooming in crystal vases. She watched like a hawk as Daniela passed priceless antiques and delicate porcelain. Arturo sat at a small table, morning light streaming through the glass ceiling. "Ah, Daniela. Good morning. Sleep well." "In my apartment." "Actually," Daniela replied. "I needed to care for my mother first, but I'm here now." "Your mother," Lorena interrupted. "I thought you were an orphan." "Foster care," Daniela corrected quietly. "Maria took me in when I was young. She's been my mother in every way that matters." Something flickered in Arturo's eyes. "Lorena, bring another place setting, and perhaps some of those almond croissants Elizabeth used to love." Lorena stiffened at the mention of Elizabeth but complied. As she arranged the delicate china, she studied Daniela's interaction with Arturo. The girl was clearly trying to make a good impression, her manners impeccable despite her obvious unfamiliarity with such luxury. "Tell me about your work at the care center," Arturo suggested, pouring tea. "It's challenging but rewarding. Many of our residents don't have family visitors. Sometimes all they need is someone to listen, to make them feel valued." "And you provide that?" I try. Music helps, classical pieces especially, and gardening therapy when weather permits. Arturo's interest sharpened. You garden? Nothing like your magnificent roses, Daniela said quickly. But yes, we have a small therapeutic garden. The residents love watching things grow. It gives them hope. Perhaps Arturo hesitated. Would you like to see the main garden properly? Elizabeth, my late wife, she designed it. Lorena nearly dropped the teapot. Mr. Morgan, you never allow anyone in the private gardens. Even the groundskeepers work under strict supervision. This is different, Arturo said firmly. Come, Daniela. As they walked the winding paths, Arturo pointed out Elizabeth's favorite flowers. Daniela listened intently, occasionally asking surprisingly knowledgeable questions about soil conditions and pruning techniques. These white roses, she said suddenly, stopping by a particular bush. They smell like summer rain, Arturo finished softly. Elizabeth called them her midnight roses. She would cut them at dusk, said their fragrance was strongest then. Daniela touched a petal gently. It reminds me of something. A woman singing, maybe, but that's impossible. Just another confused childhood memory. Lorena, following at a discreet distance, felt her anxiety rising. The girl's every movement, her natural affinity for the garden, even her unconscious gestures all reminded her too much of Elizabeth. And that locket. Mr. Morgan, she called sharply. Your 10 a.m. conference call. Ah, yes, Arturo looked regretfully at the gardens. Business calls. But perhaps later, Daniela, you could help me with the deadheading. These autumn roses need attention. I'd like that, Daniela smiled. Throughout the day, Lorena watched as Daniela moved through the house. The girl seemed drawn to certain places: the music room with its grand piano, the library's window seat where Elizabeth used to read, the small greenhouse where rare orchids bloomed. The household staff whispered among themselves. Some noted her resemblance to old photos of Elizabeth, others dismissed her as a clever gold digger. Lorena encouraged the latter view, dropping subtle hints about Daniela's suspicious appearance in their lives. That evening she found Daniela in the garden, carefully pruning roses in the fading light. The girl's movements were precise, almost familiar. Those are very expensive plants, Lorena said coldly. One wrong cut could ruin them. I know what I'm doing, Daniela replied, not looking up. These need to be cut at a 45-degree angle, just above a leaf node. Like this. The correct technique, exactly as Elizabeth had always done it. Lorena felt a chill despite the warm evening. Let me be clear, she said. Whatever game you're playing, whatever you hope to gain here, it won't work. I protect this family. Daniela finally looked up, her eyes reflecting the sunset. I'm not playing any game, Mrs. Brooks. I just want to know what it feels like to have a father, even for a short time. Is that so hard to understand? What I understand is that you're a stranger who's manipulated her way into this house. 1 week may seem harmless to Mr. Morgan, but I'll be watching. One wrong move, one missing piece of silver, and you'll be out that gate faster than you can blink. Daniela carefully placed the pruning shears in their case in exactly the spot Elizabeth had always kept them. I'm sorry you feel that way, Mrs. Brooks, but I'm here at Mr. Morgan's invitation.